So good night to our viewers. Good evening to our viewers. Today we have Ed Locke, who is the Dean Professor of Leadership and Motivation of the R.H. Smith School of Business at the University of Maryland. So thanks for being with us, Ed. And let's explore the relationship of objectivism to psychology.
I'm emeritus now. I've been retired 20 years, but I'm still active in writing and the like.
For sure, no problem.
So the first question that we would like to ask you is just take us back in time and help us set the context of when you discovered objectivism and what was the environment like at the time.
It was about 1958, and I happened to see on TV, which was not in our room, but was at a club, the part of the Fountainhead movie, which I really found interesting. I didn't know anything about it. So I went to one of my teachers, said, "What is this?" He says, "Oh, it's Ayn Rand, The Fountainhead." So I bought so I really liked the part of the movie I saw. So I bought the book right away and I really loved it. And because it was 1958, I read, when I got that book, there was an insert that said, you can also read Atlas Shrugged, which was 1957. So I immediately bought that book and couldn't put it down for 3 days and read the whole thing through. So I was completely mesmerized. I was a bit chagrined that my roommates weren't the slightest bit interested in any of it. So I figured, okay, that's their problem. So I just kept doing it. And then when I went to Cornell for graduate school, they had started the tape lectures. And Nathaniel Brandon came up for, I guess, the opening objectivism lecture. The rest was on tape. And then when I finished at Cornell, I moved to Washington, D.C. And then there was a regular group who did the taped courses. I was a representative myself for a while and a lot of others. So I took them all. And then I went to all the conferences starting in the 1990s. And I've read everything Ayn Rand's ever written. I believe most of it more than once, many more than several times. So that was my acquaintance with Ayn Rand. And I met her once. She came to the opening of Objectivism with Brandon in Washington, D.C. around 1960, around 1964. She came up in person, so I met her for the first time. And they stayed for the question period for the first lecture. And it was, again, all taped. That was a very large crowd, several hundred. So then we started getting the local tapes for our objectivist group in Washington. And that was much smaller, maybe 10 regulars, sometimes 15.
Right. So what was the context? So nowadays, we meet people like online, and I've met all kinds of objectivists and famous intellectuals through the internet. And then sometimes in person whenever they decide to travel to South America. But what was the scene back in the 60s and 70s in terms of like meeting people? You know, today we have some known objectivists like Harry Binswanger and Danner Peikoff. What was the context for you to get to know them?
I didn't know. I didn't meet either of them, I don't think, until they started doing the ARI summer meetings, starting in 1990s sometime. So I had not met either one of them. And so I didn't really talk much with Leonard, talked more with Harry. And I went to all of the summer ARI courses, almost all of them. Although lately, because of my age, it's harder for me to travel. I haven't been to as many, but I usually am able to get part of them online, even when I'm home. So I went to all the functions, and I went to all the Ford Hall forums when Ayn Rand was speaking, and all the ones when Leonard was speaking until he stopped. And plus there were various other lectures occasionally in there were things in New York, though I didn't go to there too much, but sometimes.
Yes, I see. So getting into, shifting gears a little bit and getting to your career, why did you decide to pursue a career in psychology and as an academic?
Well, I was, when I went to Harvard, I didn't have a career in mind, and I was just trying stuff out. My mother was religious. She brought me up going to Sunday school and, Sundays and church and stuff like that. And I didn't agree with it. And she said, well, you ought to take some courses where you really learn about from good theologians. One time she moved to Georgia at one point and she said, I'm going to invite a minister to the house to convert you. So I said, sure. So he and I talked and I said, well, what's your view? He said, well, church is kind of a cocktail party. And it went downhill from there. I said, Mom, that didn't work very well. He was ridiculous. So at Harvard, I took first a course on philosophy from a sniveling cynic, sort of like Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged slime balls. And I couldn't remember a single useful thing from the course, except that everything was cynical. Then I took a course from the world's most famous Protestant theologian, Paul Tillich. And he said, somebody said to him, what is, how did he phrase it? What is God? I said, that's a good question. He said, a God, in a very thick German accent, God is your ultimate concern. So he said, okay, supposing money is your ultimate concern. He says, that is your God. I said, this isn't a very promising introduction to philosophy. So in the final, I wrote a criticism of religion, and he gave me an A. I said, pretty much I'm finished with academic philosophy and academic theocracy. So that was really it until, except for the novels, till I got to Cornell and I started giving tape lectures. So I rejected religion. Really bored me to death, absolutely, and didn't do anything for me. So I just finally, when I was 18, I said, and my roommates and I said, we're atheists. We don't believe in it. So none of us did. So that was it. So anyway, from then on, it was objective.
So why did you decide to get into psychology?
Well, I wasn't sure what to do. And so I took courses in a variety of fields, and among them psychology. I knew Freud and I knew Skinner, and I didn't think they were that great. But I didn't take any courses from them. But I got somewhat interested in psychology, and behaviorism in experimental psychology was the dominant theme. Skinner was at Harvard. I didn't take any courses with Skinner. And of course, Freud was also there because of you being motivated. So Skinner was environmental determinism and Freud was subconscious determinism. They're both determinist in different ways. So I didn't really see any benefit to that. So I started taking psychology, and my father at that time was a very successful businessman in Chicago. He was divorced from my mother, remarried, moved to Chicago. He's head of a big railroad company. And I was kind of awestruck It was one of the bigger railroad car companies. And so I thought that's one possibility. And I started reading up on business, and I read a book called The Organization Man, which is a very famous book at the time, and it projected business as very conformist. And I said, I don't think I like that. No. So then I said, I think I'll look more into psychology. So I took various courses, and I finally ended up majoring in psychology. And one of my teachers was a Skinnerian student, but he wasn't anti-consciousness. And he was my advisor. So I went to him when I was a senior. I said, I'm not quite sure what to do. I'm interested in business. My father seems very successful and likes it a lot. And I like psychology, but I don't like rat psychology and pigeon psychology. He said, why don't you combine them? I said, what's that? He said, it's industrial psychology. I said, I never heard of it. What is that? He said, it's psychology applied to business. I said, wow, what is it? Where would you study that? He said, Cornell and the University of Chicago. So I applied to both places. I got accepted at Cornell with a scholarship. I paid my tuition. I said, well, I'm gonna have to try it. I don't know what it's gonna be like. I have to try it. And I don't know if I can good enough to do it. So my advisor there was a famous woman psychologist, one of the earliest women industrial psychologists when women weren't accepted. And so I liked her. And so I took the first exam. And before the exam, the students could hand in their own questions for the exam, and she might use them or might not use them. So you could get over 100. So anyway, so I took the exam and I got 105 out of 100. He says, oh, this guy must be pretty able and smart. So I got an assistantship there. And then another one of my professors, Ryan, T.A. Ryan, was very anti-behaviorist. And he wanted to study consciousness. And in the Ryan and Smith early industrial psychology textbook, okay, there was a graph of an experiment done in 1935 by an Englishman. And it was on goal setting. The only experiment I'd ever seen or heard of on goal setting. I said, wow, that sounds really interesting. So I talked to my TA Ryan. He said, oh yeah, I think that's a promising way to go. And he was writing a book on cognitive approach to motivation. He didn't like behaviorism or Freudianism. And so I read all his preliminary chapters. And I did my dissertation on goal setting. And that turned out well. And so then it was time to find a job. I could have gone to Sears, which was a very big, profitable company in those days. They offered me a job in business in the Sears headquarters. And I could have gone to a research institute. And I said to the Sears guy, I work for you, you tell me what to do, right? He said, well, yeah. I said, well, that's legitimate. And I went to the researcher. I said, what can I do on my own? He said, I can help you get a grant from the Navy to study goal setting. So I went there and I got a grant to study goal setting and started doing research. That's when I started. So that went on for, I'll tell you later, 50 years. So my dissertation came out well. I got a grant from the Office of Naval Research, started doing other experiments and getting them published. And at that time, the two major forces, of course, behaviorism, which is conditioning, mindless conditioning. And then there's Freudianism, which is all motivation is subconscious. So you can't really measure it by conscious methods. So you got to take projective tests, which were telling stories about pictures, called the TAT, traumatic apperception test. So I didn't find either of those were too promising. So I started conscious goal setting, and nobody else had done it before. And so I started getting published, and people took to it because it was a kind of study that worked. There are a lot of crap that's published in scientific journals. One-shot things which nobody replicates. They don't make any sense. My stuff kept coming out, and other people did it. Said, wow, here's a motivational approach that worked well. And I got a following, and then everyone started to do goal-setting studies. Then a colleague at Toronto started doing his own research. He rediscovered goal setting, studying people in the woodworking field, people who chop trees. And he found goal setting also. So we started working together, which we did for decades afterwards. And around 1990, we discovered there's been hundreds of studies in goal setting by ourselves and other people. The other people said, I'm going to do this because it actually works. So I said, let's write a book. And we put all the research of 400 studies together through induction. And we published a book called The Theory of Goal Setting and Task Performance, which was became a very big hit book. And we covered everything known from beginning to end. And that's really got us going even more so. And then even more people do it. And we did other books and the like. So that's how I came to be. When I went to graduate school, Skinnerian was still primary. And when I went to my first job, I started writing things against behaviorism, which was kind of risky because it was considered so axiomatic. I'll tell you a story. I had a colleague who said, I can't, even with you privately in another room, I can't use the word consciousness. I can't do it, except for right now, I can't do it. I said, why not? He said, because people will think I'm a raving mystic and I'm against science. And I was shocked by this. Then I talked to another professor. I said, well, what about you? He said, well, I know it's wrong, but I can't say it in public. He said, well, when I get tenure, then I'll talk about what I really believe. He never did, because people were terrified of the status quo, conformity. And part of the reason is they didn't have a philosophy to oppose it. Now, by that time, I knew objectivism, and I knew consciousness was an axiom, therefore irrefutable. I knew free will was valid, therefore determinism was wrong. I started writing and citing Ayn Rand wherever relevant, not artificially, wherever relevant, right away in articles. And then when I wrote articles where her name would be relevant, I would also cite her. And then at conferences, I would talk about Ayn Rand's views on something. And I even got known for this of goal setting and Ayn Rand. So I got kind of famous. And then they said, well, why don't you do a review of Atlas Shrugged for the main magazine in business? Oh, really? I can do whatever I want? I said, yeah, you can say whatever you want. So I'm going to do it. So I published a review of Atlas Shrugged. So I got known even more so for that. And then another person wrote me to do a book on Ayn Rand's ethics for a journal. Wow, I can do whatever I want? Said, yes. Okay, I'm going to do it. And I dissed the other theories. And I said, here's Ayn Rand's theory. And then later, so as I got known for both things, the editor of a series of books called, what was it called? Sociology of Knowledge. They wanted me to edit an entire book. I said, I can do whatever I want on a whole book. I said, yep. So I did it on postmodernism. So I don't know if you know from your courses how bad that is.
Yes.
Complete subjectivism. So I said, I want to do this. Ayn Rand said, you may know this, when you see an irrational philosophy, Don't try to refute it. Try to ask what would happen if you lived by it on a daily basis. So here's what I did for the plan of the book. I said, okay, I'm going to invite several postmodernists to write part one. And I knew who they were. I wrote them all. Can you do a postmodernist essay, postmodernism in management? Say whatever you want. I'm not going to edit you. I said, okay, we'll do it. Fine. Then I picked 5 critics, but not great ones, but critical as they could have without philosophy. I said, okay, could you write a critic of postmodernism? I said, yeah, we'll do that. I said, part 3 is for me. So part 3 started with Ayn Rand's advice. I pretended to start a company with a fiction story. And I was a business guy who had taken philosophy in college. I'm going to start a business. So I said, okay, I'm going to start it using, as the fictional guy, using postmodernism literally. No beating around the bush. I'm going to do exactly what it says. So I went through thinking of the business, how to hire employees, how to deal with marketing, how to deal with customers, how to hire. And I'm going to write a whole story of the sequence of the beginning all the way to the end where the business fails and he commits suicide. Okay. Yeah. Then I had Ankar. So that was a 2-part essay. The second part of the essay was Objectivism as an antidote to postmodernism. That followed the story. So Ankar I wrote a draft of that part, and he.
And what year was this?
What year?
Yeah.
Hold on. (2003).
Okay, so Ankar was pretty young. I mean.
Yeah, but he wrote. I'll tell you more.
30s, but...
Not only did he help me edit that one, the technical philosophy, I needed his help. So he wrote say, here's the alternative to postmodernism. And then I also invited him, said, would you do for part 2 an article on Kant as the founder of postmodernism? In other words, guaranteed publication for him, not twice. So he wrote that as the part 2 critic, as the best critic. So we had him followed by part 3, and then a little slam to postmodernism at the very end of that chapter. By the way, the one I just told you about was the business one, is in the Ayn Rand archives. I sent it to Mike Berliner. It's in the Ayn Rand archives. The one by Ankar, I was told he had written a longer one, but may not have ever finished it. So I don't know if that's in the archives, although I sent it to Ankar so he could keep it for the files. So it was just an anti-Kantian article, right. Like you can't see because you have eyes. You can't hear. Yeah. You have a mind because you can't think. So I don't know if that's in the archives, but the other one is. So
I'll be sure to ask him.
Yeah. So I sent him copies of both of those, so for his own file. So so then this kind of added on. I got a guy was writing a book of Untitled Chapters on managerial wisdom, and I knew him. He said, "Would you do a whole chapter on objectivism? A whole chapter just on objectivism? Really?" Usually I could talk shortly, but never invited. I did a whole chapter on objectivism as the best philosophy for living on Earth. And they said, fine, we're not going to edit it at all. So this kind of thing mushroomed. Okay. So, which was very nice for me. And I got other invitations also. So that's sort of my career.
So how come you managed to have to break from the status quo? As everyone is pretty much a behaviorist or a Freudian, and you managed to, in a very Howard Rourke sense, pursue your standards, what you thought was true.
Yeah.
and in a context which is academia, that is not the friendliest to new ideas as far as
that's a good question. Let me tell you, first of all, why I wasn't tempted. A lot of cowardice among academics, and there's lots of, most of them are, is because they don't have a philosophy beyond their immediate tiny interest in why frogs are affected by electricity, that kind of silly stuff. They don't have a philosophy beyond that, especially not in values and not in concepts. So they had no philosophical defense against behaviorism. And what to say, except it seems impractical for me. But they were afraid. I wasn't afraid philosophically. Another factor was that, of course, I had goal setting studies going for me as my main publications in IO Psych journals. I mentioned Ayn Rand when it was relevant. So, and at conferences, often they were topics where I could just speak up on something that, let's have a panel on honesty in industry. So I brought up Ayn Rand. And so I got known for that. But I wasn't afraid philosophically. And I wasn't going to be kicked out of school in IO psychology. It didn't take as much in IO as all the other branches.
Right.
Not as much. There were two hardcore Skinnerians in IO Psych who were well known. Now I dissed both of them. One of them quit the field later, and one retired. So there weren't really any left. So behaviorism died out. It started dying out in the late 70s, generally because it was so stupid, so irrational. So at that point, there were fewer and fewer defenders because it was 50 years of nonsense. So I didn't have to worry about losing my job. I mean, I still would have spoken up, but didn't worry about it.
Right. Yeah. Shifting a little bit to, but again, still in let's say these applications of psychology to business, there are some common tests to assess personality as a way of figuring out, if a particular, if they fit the job and the requirements of it. The most famous ones are the Myers-Briggs type indicator and the Big Five. So what is your view of these in terms of validity? And
Myers-Briggs became a literal cult, not an actual science. A separate group was a cult, and it was considered magic because it was so simplistic. That's because it was worthless. Okay, so they disappeared from the IO Psych literature. They have their own group, but they didn't appear. Now the Big Five is still a big thing. I tell you a secret about the Big Five. These are general traits. Okay, goal setting is about task-specific goals, not goals for all of your life. Task-specific goals. So let's take conscientiousness, which is the big one. Its questions are about your recollection of your typical behaviors in life. Now, this is a problem. First of all, it's very general. Okay, doesn't talk about your behavior in your psych course. Talks about, and the questions are asking you to report your past behavior. Now, the past behavior is the best prediction of future behavior. But questionnaires like that aren't causal in the same sense. You can correlate conscientiousness with performance. But that doesn't make it a cause, like in the case of goals, because it's just a report of your past behavior on a questionnaire predicting your current behavior. So these are statistical relationships with the Big Five. They don't have a definition, personality over and above the self-report of past behavior. Goal setting is about your conscious goal for a particular task and outcome. So it's causal. Because we did experiments. You can't do experiments on the Big Five. to get causality. So it's useful practically, especially conscientiousness. It's useful practically up to a point, but it's only a prediction, not a causal entity. So it's still widely used, but nobody I know in the field uses Myers-Briggs. It's a separate cult.
Yeah, I see. So there's another popular, let's say, belief. I'm not sure belief is the right word, but there's a popular common knowledge, somewhat common knowledge, that it takes 10,000 hours of practice,
Oh yeah,
deliberate practice, to achieve mastery. And I've heard you describe this as a myth. So
this
could
wasn't
you
an
elaborate on your critiques?
This wasn't an IO psychologist. I think he was a social psychologist. I met him many years ago in Greece at a conference. Talked to him because I knew something about this. So here's the phony baloney aspect. If you want to do an experiment on number of hours as a cause of success, you have to pick a random sample, right? And then you expose all those people to equal training. That's not the way they did that. They took people who are already violinists, and they found out the top violinists had spent approximately 10,000 hours, as though that was a sufficient condition
Right. Okay.
to be an expert. But they didn't deal with the dropouts, because how many people who study the violin can't do it or wouldn't even try, like me, because they're tone deaf? It was very misleading. And I said, I asked the guy, are you telling me anyone who spent 2,000 hours can be world-class? Thinking I was joking. Oh, he said, yes.
Okay.
It's bullshit. It's
Right.
total bullshit. So now, why would a person say that? It's a political motive. Can you guess why?
Oh yeah, because everyone can then be equal, right? As long as you put in the work, you can
Everyone
achieve.
can be equal. And how dare you claim people are born with different talents, which they are. So everyone can be equal. It's just a matter of getting a good coach and spending a lot of time. So it's just a political motive. So, and I'll tell you another story. I had a colleague who I talked to about this, and he thought it was bullshit too. And I said, do you know anything more about this? He said, yeah. And there was data. I said, well, where's the data? So he wrote this guy that did the famous work. And the guy said, the data is in a computer in Germany. Okay, so what's university? University Dusseldorf or whatever. So we wrote them, said, could we see the raw data? Said, we're so sorry, we can't find it anymore. So mumbo jumbo, they probably were data, but we don't even trust that data. So the point is, here's the point with effort, here's the axiom. With effort, anyone can improve on anything up to a point. Up to a point. You know, even the dumbest math person can get better at math up to a point and then reach a limit. So everyone reaches a ceiling. Okay. Take tennis. I'm a tennis player. I had to retire because of my heart condition. I took tennis lessons for 40 years. I was a mediocre club player. Started out as a below mediocre with many, many lessons and hours of play. That's mediocre. And then I became a mediocre seniors player. Now, that's a lot different than Nadal and that group who were noticed at a young age as being very gifted. And when they work hard, they'll get to a higher level. So that's the point. They'll get to a higher level. So
Right.
Everyone can improve, but everyone doesn't get to the same place. And that
So-
really makes egalitarians mad. Same with intelligence. It's mostly genetic. But anyone who uses their intelligence can learn, but everyone doesn't learn as well as everyone else. I don't like that. That's political.
So the 10,000 hour idea, it was popularized by Malcolm Gladwell.
He got it from the other guy.
Yes, yes, yes,
Gladwell is a popularizer of other
Yeah.
people's work.
yes, yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
he does that. He was popularizing the subconscious as omniscient. I don't know if you read that about the fireman knowing when to go into the burning building and not, because it was a subconscious motive that hindered them. He's done a lot of stuff like that. But he doesn't know the actual research. And
Right.
the fireman thing was not really honest, because firemen have a store of conscious knowledge they acquire from learning. So it's conscious and subconscious together, which work. And he had to retract it. I think in the last chapter of that book, he had to, I don't want to say conscious knowledge isn't relevant to life. That's what he was implying. So you got to watch Gladwell. He's a very good writer, very dramatic writer, but he popularizes what other people write. He's not a scientific expert.
Right. Yeah, I read Gladwell's books before I got into objectivism. So I have a different, like, what I remember at the time was I had a positive view of the books, but I haven't gone back to like do this kind of analysis on them yet. But
It's fun
on my-
reading because he's a good writer.
yeah, that for sure. Yeah. And part of his argument is that he spent 10,000 hours working as a writer for the New York Times before he began. Yeah. So but part of what he's talking about is the concept of deliberate practice. And that's really, so it's not just the sheer number of hours, but a certain way of engaging with the task you're trying to perfect.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on deliberate practice? Is it a valid concept?
Absolutely. You're starting at age 2 when you go to Montessori, beginning school, right? You learn, and learn. And as the grades get higher, you have more to learn. And the grades get higher, you have more to learn. You have to read and write and think, take tests and do things. So remember, the human mind at birth is blank. There's nothing in there. So your entire subconscious is full of stuff you acquired through learning. And you know, from the objectivism training, you learn things you didn't know, right?
Right. So it
So you
seems
got
like
better because you spent time on it.
I think this ties into the objectivist view of you have to be focused. You can't just, it's not necessarily evasion, but you can't be in a low state of focus and learn at the same time.
Conceptual focus as opposed to perception.
Right.
That's what the sense perception. Conceptual focus, which is concepts. The human, other than perceptual learning, which is we have, from age 1, conceptual learning is a process lifetime if you choose to use your mind, and that requires, that's free will. Now, some objectivists got messed up on this early on. I won't mention names. They denied that intelligence was partly genetic. The evidence is crystal clear on this. And there's one guy whose name I won't mention. After 20 years, he acknowledged I was right. That the evidence is overwhelming here. And the difference is everyone can get better, but everyone doesn't get to the same place. So it was a huge error. I think volition is omnipotent. Huge error. I think even Ayn Rand agreed that people differ. She said most people don't use all the conceptual ability they have. She didn't deny people that differ. I mean, Ayn Rand was a genius. She said it was only because she's honest. Total bull BS. No, she wasn't because she's honest. She's a genius, right? Being honest wouldn't have done for her. I mean, she was honest, but being honest wouldn't have invented objectivism. So,
so what role do you think in this issue of intelligence and let's say maximizing or fulfilling one's ability? What role do you think parents have in setting an environment for their children, for them to be able to develop So I have a, as you saw before, I have a 2-year-old, and
Okay.
my wife and I try our best to create a great environment for her to be able to develop.
Okay.
But
Um,
whenever I observe other parents, it's often the case that I see them doing things that I think are impairing the development of the child. So how do you think?
Let's start at the beginning. Number one, as a parent, you want a sane universe. You know what I mean by that? A sane universe is where the arbitrary is out of the picture. When you have to do things they don't like, you give them reasons. Or if you're doing something they don't like, you give them reasons. I have to go to school. Yes, you do. And I don't care if you cry. You're going to school and you have to learn. Otherwise, you'll end up with starving to death. Okay. So, and when you have to punish, nowadays you don't spank anymore. I only spanked my daughter once when she deserved it. But basically, you don't spank anymore. You do other things. You say you're going to go to your room and stay there. In the near future, I'm going to take away toys. And they're like, I only spanked her when she tried to cross the street by dropping. I had her hand. She dropped and tried to rush across the street, and that was life-threatening. I grabbed her and spanked her. She never did it again, and I don't regret it. So otherwise, you give them consequences. Charlotte, if you know Charlotte Cushman's book on Montessori. Charlotte
No.
Cushman, Cushman, and she's written 2 books, one on Montessori and one on discipline. I reviewed it on Amazon. Charlotte Cushman, Cushman. So that's on discipline in Montessori, but discipline more generally, full of ideas, including a whole appendix over that. Now, a child's doing something you don't like, it depends on what they're doing. For instance, are they reaching on top of the stove? No. Go and don't come in this room anymore till I tell you, Or they grab some bottle out of a drawer. No, you don't drop any bottles. And of course, we always put locks on the special door locks of any doors that had chemicals, for protecting that. We had removed places where there might be danger of falling and the like. For crossing the street, we held her hand. So what kind of things are you thinking of that you don't like?
Well, she usually doesn't have. We usually, we have a very good child. So she's really well behaved. Depending on the context we're in, we don't have many big problems with her whatsoever. But I think part of that has to do with the fact that we allow her to explore. We allow her to do things, as opposed to what I often see, which is parents stopping their kids from doing things. So if we are outside, for example, it's often the case that I see other kids be around their parents and not be allowed to roam, even if it's like the playground or the park or something. Yeah. And I allow my daughter to be free.
Right. You just got to be sure they're not doing anything dangerous, right?
Right. Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, let them, but not on the street, not near the street, right. And you decide what kind of kindergarten playground stuff they can go on, not for the older kids, for the younger kids. And yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so let me
don't let them go near a dog unless the dog is okay. So you're the agent of reality. Think of that concept. You're the agent of reality for a child. So you teach them good things, you prevent harmful things, you encourage and help them to learn. By the way, I hope you read to your kids every day.
I don't, but my wife does a few times a week.
Every single day. And a good time to do that is at night, bedtime.
Right.
Not the only time. My mother read to me as far back as I can remember. And one of the things that happened was I became a person who loved reading, and I still, at age 84, love it. I read voraciously.
Yeah, so do you think
Love learning.
do you think the type of book matters? Because sometimes I'll get ITOE or OPAR, and I'll read, and she kind of sits there and enjoys it for a little bit.
Books that she can understand at her age.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Okay. You mean
You're
like
not going to
picture?
understand objectivism at age. How old is
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
daughter?
I know. And I don't mean it for pedagogical purposes. It's just that it's an activity that she enjoys being around as I'm reading.
Now read books for children that you think are not too stupid or silly. There's some are better than others. Some are vacuous. Some may be altruistic, but there's thousands and thousands of children's books. So my mother read to me and my brother every night, and she picked the books. And when I was in grade school, she helped pick a whole library for me. Sherlock Holmes, Knights of the Round Table, mysteries that I could, at age 9, 10, 11, that I could read. And when I was sick in bed, didn't have TV, then later on, I would pick a book. I loved it. So reading is indispensable. You and you're married, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yes.
You can take turns. You don't have to both
Sorry?
all. You can take turns with your wife,
Right.
reading different things at different times. And you'll also notice with young children that they sometimes ask you to read it again.
Hmm.
I would finish this book. I don't know how old my daughter was, maybe 4. And I said, "How do you like it?" I said, "Read it again." Okay. I finished it. Read it again. And I usually limit it to 3. So now you're gonna have to pick another book. But children, from Montessori, children like repetition.
Yeah. That is one thing my daughter for the children's book, baby books that she has. She has this thing about my wife borderline memorized some of these, but the sheer number of times she has read them.
Yeah, Montessori encourages repetition, especially as young children, because they don't learn in one time. They have to sink in and they have to integrate it, and that's stored in the subconscious. So the ideal is as they grow and they learn. How old did you say she was?
She's 2 years and 9 months.
She's too early. I think in Montessori, I don't know if you go there. My ex-wife's Montessori school, where my daughter went, was allowing toddler program at age, I think, 2.5, and they learn writing before reading. There's a pedagogical reason, I forget what it was. They learn writing before reading, and then they all learn phonetics. But no matter what she did at school, we always read to her at night or during the day, some convenient time. And reading is so important because in the modern culture, a lot of kids don't want to read. It's too much work. Or I have to do words. I want to see pictures. I don't want to do words. Oh no, I want pictures. The quickie TV cartoon. I'm not against cartoons, but reading is a separate thing from TV. So it's very valuable. And the ideal is if my daughter has 2 sons, and she would take them, forget what age she started this, take them to the library every weekend. They would pick out books. And they would go home. As she got older, sometimes she would pick 10 books. She had 2 different age. She would bring them home and then take them back and get 10 more. So they were inveterate readers. And eventually, she could still read to them at bedtime. They liked it, but they could read themselves. The library was a tremendous asset to have. You don't want to buy 10 books a week. You can get 10 books a week, from local library.
And I have a personal question. Last year, I participated in a conference where the topic was the psychological impact, especially on students, given this modern, postmodern culture where you cannot speak about kind of sensible topics, like, for example, depression, anxiety. So because somehow it hurts the person who is listening to the topic, given their own personal experiences.
Who's the audience?
No, it was like a discussion between people reading like a Liberty Fund conference, where you read a given set of texts and then you discuss among people.
Adults?
Yes, exactly.
Oh, okay. And you have
And
a reading group?
yes, we were all supposed to read the same material and then discuss our personal opinions on the topic. And right now, not only inside the university, but the pandemic showed that many people needed psychological treatment, in the sense that they that this particular condition kind of triggered many problems that were somehow buried and not treated before.
Yes.
So in this sense, what do you think? It is a complicated question, but what do you think is the best practice for a person like an objectivist who has a good philosophy? Is it possible to work on a therapy without a rational philosophy, in the sense that it is important to have clear concepts and being able to express what you're feeling in objective terms for the person doing the therapy, be able to help you in the process?
Sure. I mean, the most popular is cognitive behavior therapy, which is telling people your subconscious thoughts in words, and then they challenge, like, you're thinking, I'm no good. Tell me what you mean by that, and where you got that from, and why do you think that's true? And is there any other evidence that implies you might be wrong about that? I mean, they're not objectivists by any means, but if that's helpful. Sure.
Yes, exactly, because there is a growing movement inside the objective, especially people dedicated to psychology, to recommend this kind of practice, especially cognitive therapy, to address psychological problems overall. I like the field, and I think there's a lot of potential, especially inside philosophical thinkers, to explore the importance of psychology overall by applying objectivism to the discussion as well.
Well, that's a little bit tricky, because objectivism doesn't have a theory of therapy. It has principles of self-esteem and understands where emotions come from. It doesn't have a theory of therapy. So a therapist who do CBT might help with having people question wrong conclusions they have about themselves and question, and that's been effective in helping with depression. It's not a magic thing. Perfect. But I did therapy for a while, and it's kind of difficult because everyone's so totally different. I had one patient that thought most people didn't like him, and I didn't either. I tried to be positive. And you can't change a person's total personality in therapy. So you can't necessarily uncover tons of subconscious premises set at an early age. And it's not that easy to do. So you work with what you can, but they could have a wrong premise such as altruism that's affecting them in a lot of bad ways. And you could say, I want to be a doctor, but my father wants me to be a lawyer, or wants me to go into the family business. You could say, let's talk about whether you have a right to your own life and whether it's fair for him to make you lead a life that he wants. So up to a point, you could bring stuff like that up, but you're not going to do necessarily the magical things. Because some clients are much more far gone than others. I had a patient who he thought to be a good person, he had to own a steel mill. Like what's his name in Atlas Shrugged, Reardon. I said, you mean to be okay with yourself, you have to be like Reardon? And he said, yes. And he realized how terrible a wrong set of premises must be to do that, because his career was a waiter in a restaurant. It's a respectable profession. So why would a person pick something ridiculously inappropriate to be okay? Well, a lot of people do that. Another patient I had wanted to be president. Instead of what? Instead of the United States. His job was clerical. Current job was clerical. And I had another patient who said, I don't feel I can masturbate. I said, why not? He said, it means I'm no good as a lover. It means I can't find a woman. I said, masturbation is totally normal, whether you have a woman or not. Now I could help, but he said, oh, I never thought of that. The other two, think of the many connections in the subconscious that lead them set over many years. How much could I help the guy? Only up to a point. This one guy said, no woman would ever love me, and most women wouldn't. I said, but there's probably some women who might like you. And he said, well, not if they got to know me and saw that I was no good. But he said, all women aren't super confident geniuses, Why don't you, check it out? I don't know if I moved away. I don't know if anything ever happened. So you can do limited things, but I don't think you can change a person's entire psychology and therapy that easily. You can help them. Get rid of false premises for one thing.
Perfect. Thanks.
So Ed, let me ask you our last question. So a few years ago, there was a lecture. So I think this was in 2018, where you were talking about Elon Musk, and you were making some connections on, at the time, Tesla wasn't being very successful and there are all kinds of problems, and you're making some critiques on, in part, the fact that there's a sense in which he's a genius, he's very creative, but you were criticizing his implementation, which, as I've been observing, I see that he always misses the deadlines by a lot, and projects get forgotten. But since then, Tesla took off in some ways, and I would like to hear your updated analysis, if you have one.
Well, as you said, I thought he was a genius, and it was a brilliant idea. Was doing very badly. I thought the company would probably go bankrupt. I was wrong. They made a fantastic success. I give him credit for that. It was a work of genius. Now, when he sticks to that, apparently he was a precocious child. He learned math in like no time and stuff like that. But when he gets into things that involve philosophy, he was making ridiculous comments about Ukraine. It's totally stupid. He doesn't know anything about politics and political philosophy. So he's pretentious in thinking his genius automatically translates from cars and related things to everything. I hate to think what's going to be on, was it Twitter? Because apparently he had some admiration for Trump. He's really, really a bad person. Really, really bad person. Philosophically, politically, psychologically, really crumb. and he doesn't see through it. But you need a little philosophy to see what does Trump actually represent. So, so I think Twitter's maybe not going to go so well from our point of view. I don't know if you'll make money at it. But, and of course, in the car business, how this will work out, he's now confronted by many, many imitators from every country. Every place is doing this. Now, you got to stay ahead of the curve as they get better. And I have no opinion how that will work out. But he made billions and he earned the money. He's arrogant, partly inappropriately, because he's not philosophical, and he's narcissistic. But he's got enough genius to succeed here, and I can't predict the future for him. He might develop a Tesla plane, or he might end up with the underground thing actually working. I don't know. Maybe a Tesla blimp. Place of trucks. He's doing Tesla trucks. I don't know what's going to happen. It's not, he's got free will. He can go in any direction. You had another question. Do I have time for future